Hi there, in this video we're going to look at the sales prediction programming problem from your textbook. And the problem tells us that a company has determined that its annual profit is typically 23% of total sales. So in other words, if the company's total sales are $1 million, then the profit would be 23% of that, or $230,000. So in this program, you're going to ask the user to enter the projected amount of total sales and then display the profit that will be made from that amount. So this is going to be a program that a company can use to predict the amount of profit it will make at the end of the year based on a projected amount of sales. Now, the program is going to work like this. The user will provide the amount of total sales as input. The program will calculate 23% of that input, and then it will display the result as the projected profit. Here's an example of pseudocode for the program. First, we input the total sales. Then we calculate the profit as 23% of total sales. And then we display the profit. So the program is simply going to perform these three steps one after the other. Now that we know what the program is supposed to do, our next task is to write the Python code that performs these three steps. We're going to write the actual Python code that gets the input, performs the calculation, and displays the output. So let's take a closer look at how we're going to perform the first step. We're going to input the total sales. In Python, when you want to read input from the keyboard, you call the input function. So in this step in the program, the call to the input function is going to look something like this. Here we're calling the input function, and notice that between the parentheses we have the string enter the projected sales. Well, this is the prompt that's going to be displayed on the screen. It simply tells the user what to do. So the user is going to enter some value, and the input function will return that value. So what are we going to do with that value? Well, we want to save it in memory, and the way that we do that is that we assign the value that is returned from the input function to a variable. Since the value that the user is entering is the total sales, let's name the variable total sales. So the statement is going to look something like this. The user is going to enter a value, and that value is going to be assigned to the total sales variable. Now, there's something you have to remember about the input function. It always returns a string. So whatever the user has entered at the keyboard, that's going to be returned as a string. Since we're working with a dollar amount and we're going to be performing math with this value, then we need to convert the value that is returned from the input function to a numeric data type. And in this case, we should convert it to a float. Since we're working with a dollar amount, we should convert that to a float. So we need to do something else in our statement. We need to put this input function call inside the parentheses of the float function. The float function, you'll recall, converts whatever value is here inside the parentheses. It converts it to a float, and it returns that value. Okay, so this is what the statement is going to look like. Now, this does a lot, so let's go back over each element of this statement. First, we call the input function, which tells the user to enter the projected sales. So this reads an item from the keyboard, and it returns that value as a string. The float function converts that value to a floating point number, and then that floating point number is assigned to the total sales variable. So after this statement executes, whatever value the user has entered at the keyboard will be assigned as a floating point number to the total sales variable. Okay, so now let's switch over to our Python editor and actually start writing the program. I'm running idle on this system, and I've already created an empty source code file. So the first thing that I'm going to do before I actually type in that input statement that we looked at a moment ago, I'm going to write a comment that explains what we're doing. Get the projected total sales. Just a little comment so that anyone reading the program will know exactly what we're doing. And the statement that we looked at a moment ago was total sales equal, and then remember we have to have that float function, and we call the input function with the prompt enter the projected sales. Okay, so this is the first step in our algorithm. We're going to get the total sales. Now, the second step in the algorithm was to calculate the profit as 23% of the total sales. So let's go ahead and write a comment indicating that we're doing that. Calculate the profit as 23% of total sales. So this statement is simply going to be a statement that multiplies total sales times 0.23, and we're going to assign the result of that calculation to a variable. Let's call the variable profit. Okay, so the profit equal total sales times 0.23. So this statement will simply multiply total sales times 0.23 and assign the result to profit. And the last step in our algorithm is to display the profit. And we'll use the print function to do that. The profit is, print a $sign, and then print the value of the profit variable. Okay, so this Python code represents the algorithm that we looked at previously in pseudocode. So let's save the program, and let's run the program and test it with some sample data. Okay, so here's the prompt, and it might help if I pull the output window over here next to the source code. If you can look at the source code sort of side by side with the output of the running program. So at this point, we are sitting at this first statement in the program where we're calling the input function. So you can see it's asking me to enter the projected sales. Let's enter 1,000 because we should be able to predict what the answer is going to be. And it tells us that the profit is 230, and that is the correct result. Now, if you've read about the format function in your textbook, we can use the format function to improve this program. We can use it to format the amount of profit so that it looks like a dollar amount when it's displayed on the screen. And what I mean by that is we can format it so that it is rounded to 2 decimal places, and there are comma separators printed when the number's big enough to need those comma separators. So the way that we will use the format function, we'll just insert a call to the format function here right inside the print function. And the first argument is the value that we are formatting. In this case, it's the value of the profit variable. And then we give a second argument, which is a format specifier. This is a string that contains special characters that indicate how we're going to format this profit, the value of the profit variable. So in this case, the format specifier is going to look like this. The first character is going to be a comma. That means that we want to insert comma separators when the number is big enough to accommodate them. And then following that, 0.2, that means that we want to round the number to 2 decimal places. And then the letter F, which indicates that this is a floating point value. So that's the format specifier. And then we put the correct number of closing parentheses. Okay, so let's save the program, and now let's test it. Okay, enter the projected sales. Let's try 1,000 again, and you can see here, if we compare this output 230.00 with the previous output, we are getting the 2 decimal places. Let's run the program again, and let's enter a larger number. Let's try 10,000. And so the output 2300, you can see that we have the comma separator, and once again it's rounded to 2 decimal places.